Hello, and welcome to our special Halloween Pledge presentation featuring the documentary H.H. Holmes, America's First Serial Killer on WYCC PBS Chicago. I'm Cindy Cyperic. I'm the Director of Programming here at WYCC. What you are about to see is the true story of a madman who carried out his horrendous deeds right here in Chicago. The year was 1893, the same year Chicago hosted the World's Columbian Exposition along the lakefront. Dr. Holmes used the event to lure victims to his hotel, built just 2 blocks east of the WYCC studios on 63rd Street in Inglewood. I want to introduce you to 2 special guests who are joining me in the studio tonight to talk about this unique documentary. They are John Borowski, the writer, producer, and director of H.H. Holmes, America's First Serial Killer, and Jeff Mudgett, who is an author and lecturer who just so happens to be the great-great-grandson of H.H. Holmes. Welcome, gentlemen. Please give us a call now at 888-993-9922. Go to our website, wycc.org. Pledge your support. But in the meantime, I'd like to ask you gentlemen a few questions. I'm so glad that you're here. John, I think this is a question that folks would be interested to know. What was the inspiration to even make this documentary?
Well, thanks for having me on the show. And it is creepy that we're taping this like a block away from where his building was located at 63rd and Wallace. And I was always interested in strange Chicago history, and when you tell people about Chicago history, the macabre side of it, everyone knows Al Capone, but not many have heard of H.H. Holmes. And it was really Holmes's castle, that's what they called the building at 63rd and Wallace at the time period. It was his castle that fascinated me. He had secret doorways and chutes and trap doors. He had torture implements in the basement where he had a crematorium, and he had vats of acid. You know, I thought of this man as an evil genius who actually designed this building for basically, getting rid of human bodies, at the time period. And that fascinated me. But the more I looked into Holmes's entire life, where he went to University of Michigan Medical School, and when he was running the building here during the 1893 World's Fair, he was renting rooms, he was juggling 3 wives, he had mistresses, he was running the businesses. He was doing all of these things and getting away with it when, there were no such things as GPS and cell phones and, even telephones, Mm-hmm. So I found that fascinating, that how can one man get away with all that? Of course, there were the limitations of the time period that he took advantage of. So, I thought, if he used his intelligence for good, he could have become a great man. And unfortunately, he used it, for his evil ways.
Perfect to be on PBS, and I appreciate you being so excited to be here with us, but I really have to say again how excited I am to have you here to share your stories with our PBS audience, because it's just perfect and it belongs right here on PBS. And we're going to be hearing more behind-the-scenes stories from John and Jeff tonight during our special Halloween presentation of H.H. Holmes, America's First Serial Killer. But it's because of support from viewers like you that we're able to bring you special features like the one you're about to see tonight. For those who contribute now, we have special one-time only thank you gifts that you can choose from. When you pledge your support to WYCC tonight at the $40 level or more, you'll get to choose between one of 2 books, Bloodstains by Jeff Mudgett, which contends that H.H. Holmes here in Chicago and Jack the Ripper in London were the exact same person. Or you can choose The Strange Case of Dr. H.H. Holmes by John Borowski, which brings together 3 books about the Holmes cases, plus The Confession of H.H. Holmes. Also, for your $40 contribution, you'll get a 1-year subscription to the WYCC member magazine. For a pledge at the $50 level tonight, you will get a copy of the H.H. Holmes DVD by John Borowski. That's the film that you're about to see, and it tells the true and shocking story of the madman who built a house of horrors in Chicago in 1893. Plus, you'll get a 1-year subscription to the WYCC member magazine. Donating now at the $75 level or more, you'll get both books, Bloodstains by Jeff Mudgett and The Strange Case of Dr. H.H. Holmes by John Borowski. Plus, you'll receive the WYCC PBS Chicago member card. Now, our member card entitles you to receive 2-for-1 savings at hundreds of restaurants, plus a variety of other valuable discounts throughout the Chicago region and online. Also, for your $75 pledge, you'll get a 1-year subscription to the WYCC member magazine. For your donation of $100 or more, you'll get both books and the HH Holmes DVD that you're about to see. And in addition, you'll get the WYCC member card and a one-year subscription to the WYCC member magazine. If that weren't enough, you're also going to get the WYCC tote bag. That's good for carrying just about anything. All right, but right now, let's settle back, turn down the lights, and get set for a scary story. But if you get too scared, you can call our toll-free number. There's always a friendly voice standing by waiting to take your call and calm your nerves. All right, here it is. HH Holmes, America's first serial killer, shown here exclusively on WYCC PBS Chicago. Now, John, how long did it take you to make this documentary, and maybe share with us some of the challenges that you were faced with?
It took about 3 years to create the film. The biggest challenges were the lack of research materials. There are only 3 photographs of Holmes in existence, so I was, faced with, okay, well, how am I going to do a feature film with just, a handful of photos? So I decided to bring the mood and atmosphere about by doing reenactments that are black and white, silent film, kind of like the classic Universal monster movie style, Dracula, Frankenstein, because I always loved those when I was a child. So I thought I could bring those to life through this film. And I thought it would, again, help bring that feeling of the mood and the atmosphere to life. But it was actually the lack of research materials also that led me to create the book, The Strange Case of Dr. H.H. Holmes, because there isn't much available that's been written on Holmes. And I figured, okay, these are 3 primary source books. One you can only get from 2 libraries, the Library of Congress and a Toronto library. And then I actually have a physical copy of the 1896 book called The Holmes Peitzel Case that was written by Detective Frank Geyer, who went on the journey to find the missing children. And then it also contains a book written by a Chicago author called The Holmes Castle, and that has Holmes's complete confession as well. So it was very difficult, but again, I thought through the reenactments, and with my films I want to make them interesting and not just talking head and photos. So I even went to some of the actual locations where these crimes occurred.
Wow, well, it's a fabulous, from what we've seen so far, you've done a great job. John, can you quickly tell me, why is it so difficult for experts to determine just how many people were murdered?
Well, there were 2 factors at play. One was the archaic criminal detection methods and forensics at the time period. You're talking about a time period when phrenology was used by alienists to determine, a criminal's aptitude, and it would be the bumps on their head and how their head was shaped. So they really couldn't determine, there wasn't much evidence, so there's no way they could say how many people were killed. I believe about 9. And then also, Holmes was a master of covering up his crimes. He had a crematorium in the basement that he said he used for glass bending, but mysteriously it was the size of a human body. So we'll never know how many people he actually killed.
Wow. This is just amazing stuff, and again, I'm so thrilled that you're here with us. As you took the time to put this documentary together, did anything odd or funny happen along the way?
Well, I haven't had any experiences such as, Jeff had with the basement of, the post office, but some interesting stories. When I went to Gilmanton, New Hampshire, which is where Holmes grew up, I stayed at a bed and breakfast, and I found that some of these descendants, like the descendants of the Mudgetts, there are still Mudgetts in New Hampshire, in Gilmanton, and descendants of the Peitzels are still in St. Louis. I've had contact, and it was interesting after I completed the movie, receiving checks to purchase my film from Mudgetts and Peitzels. That was a strange thing that happened. But when I stayed at this little bed and breakfast in Gilmanton, New Hampshire, the owners there asked, well, what film are you doing? And I was kind of hesitant, when you're doing a film about a serial killer, to say, oh yeah, I'm doing this film. And I told him, well, this killer, Mudgett, and he jumped up and he was excited. He said, he used to live next door. So where I stayed in this bed and breakfast, the room at night, I could look out my window and see his childhood home, which was, a very scary experience. And then when I went to Philadelphia to film at their city hall, I was trying to find the courtroom where the trial was held. And their director of tourism said, well, no, there were no trials held here prior to 1900. In this building in the main city hall, we just celebrated our 100th anniversary. Well, I had a newspaper clipping with a drawing, and I said, well, they had to have been here. So we looked around, and sure enough, I taught them a little history that they didn't know. I found the courtroom where they had the trial. I held up the drawing, and I said, this is it with the columns. This is the exact courtroom. So I wound up filming in that courtroom, which was, very interesting. Holmes was great at what he accomplished. He was a criminal mastermind. That was his profession. And when you think about it, when you think about, okay, yeah, Gacy had 20-something bodies in his crawl space, all these other, serial killers, not one of them designed an actual building for disposing of people. And, never in history has there been someone who could parallel Holmes. I was contacted by the Wichita authorities because when the BTK killer resurfaced, he had written about Holmes. Some of these killers are familiar with other killers. He had written about HH Holmes in some of his letters, so the authorities wanted to screen my film in hopes of bringing him out of hiding. Well, he was caught before that happened, but it was interesting to be subpoenaed. They wanted all the addresses from everyone in Kansas that had ordered my film. So that was a little creepy, and it had to be involved in that case, and he was a bad serial killer as well.
Wow. Wow. Well, gosh, thank you so much, gentlemen, for taking the time with me, with our viewers, to talk about this very interesting subject matter that a lot of people aren't familiar with. Thank you again so much for spending the time with us. This documentary is not only scary, it's also a tragic piece of Chicago history. If you want to see more programs like this, then we need your support.